A firefighter dove into a raging flood to save what looked like an abandoned plastic crate. But what he found inside would change his life forever. As a loyal German shepherd fought to protect her newborn puppies, one heartbreaking secret forced him to make a choice that left millions in tears. Stay until the end, because the greatest rescue wasn't the one he made, it was the one that saved him. Gray clouds swallowed the afternoon sky as relentless rain pounded the flooded valley, turning every street into a fast-moving river that carried away pieces of countless broken lives. The rescue radio never seemed to stop. Boat 3, family trapped on a rooftop. Boat 5, elderly male swept downstream. Engine 7, report to the Eastern Subdivision. For nearly 72 hours, Caleb Brooks had answered every call without complaint. At 34, he had become one of the most respected firefighters in the county, not because he talked the loudest or smiled the most, but because he never hesitated when someone needed saving. While others counted the risks, Caleb counted the seconds before another life slipped away. His yellow rescue jacket was stained with mud. Water dripped constantly from the brim of his helmet. His gloves were torn along both palms from pulling people out of shattered windows and collapsing porches. He was exhausted, but exhaustion had become familiar years ago. Firefighters learned early that fatigue could wait. Regret could not. Caleb eased the rescue boat around the remains of what had once been a quiet neighborhood. Wooden fences floated like broken matchsticks. Children's bicycles drifted beside overturned pickup trucks. A refrigerator spun lazily in the muddy current. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked. Somewhere else, someone cried for help. He had already rescued 16 people today. He couldn't remember the names of half of them. Only their faces. A little girl wrapped in a pink blanket. An old couple clinging to a chimney. A teenage boy refusing to leave without his grandfather. Faces stayed, names disappeared. His radio crackled again. Flood levels are stabilizing. All crews begin final sweep before sunset. Copy, Caleb answered quietly. The rain had weakened into a cold drizzle, but the river was still furious. Brown water rushed between submerged homes with enough force to rip entire trees from the ground. His boat drifted into what used to be another residential block. Silence settled over everything, the eerie kind of silence that only came after disaster. No engines, no voices, only rushing water. Caleb rested one hand on the tiller, scanning every rooftop, every floating piece of debris, every broken window. Nothing. He almost turned back, then a sound. Tiny, barely louder than the rain. He cut the engine immediately. The sudden quiet felt enormous. There it was again. Not a person, not a cat, a faint, desperate whimper. Caleb narrowed his eyes and listened. The sound came in short bursts, interrupted by scratching plastic. His heartbeat slowed. Training took over. Never ignore small sounds. Sometimes the quietest cry belonged to the one who needed you most. He stood carefully inside the rocking boat and searched the current. Nearly 60 yards ahead, a massive fallen maple had become a trap for everything the flood carried downstream. Branches, roof shingles, plastic chairs, a child's red backpack, and one large blue storage crate wedged tightly between two thick limbs. It rocked violently every few seconds. Another surge like that, it would roll, and whatever was inside would disappear beneath the water forever. Caleb restarted the engine and guided the boat toward the tree. The closer he came, the stronger the current became. Water curled around the trunk like angry hands trying to drag his boat sideways. A submerged mailbox slammed against the hull. The boat lurched hard. He killed the engine again. There would be no getting closer with the motor. He grabbed the rescue rope hanging beside his seat. Years of Fire Academy drills had made the movements automatic. Tie one end to the boat, wrap the other around the waist, double-check the knot, never trust the river. The water looked calm enough to fool people. That was how it killed them. Caleb tightened the rope and looked once more at the blue crate. It dipped lower. The scratching grew frantic. "I'm coming," he muttered. Without another thought, he dove. The freezing water stole his breath instantly. His body wanted to panic. His training refused. Kick, reach, pull, kick again. The current slammed into his chest like a moving wall, dragging at his boots and heavy gear. He fought through it one stroke at a time. His shoulders burned, his lungs screamed. The crate was only a few feet away now. He grabbed a thick branch with one hand and steadied himself against the rushing current. Then he reached for the crate. It was heavier than he expected, nearly full of water. His fingers slipped across the slick plastic before finally finding the edge. He pulled it closer. The scratching stopped. For one terrifying second, everything became still. Caleb slowly lifted the cracked lid. His breath caught. Curled tightly inside was a large female German shepherd. Her black and tan coat was soaked with muddy water. Every rib showed beneath her fur. She trembled uncontrollably from cold and exhaustion. But she wasn't trying to save herself. She had wrapped her entire body around two tiny puppies no larger than loaves of bread. Every inch of her strength was being spent shielding them from the freezing rain. The puppies whimpered weakly beneath her chest. The mother simply looked up. Her amber eyes met Caleb's. There was no growling, no fear, no anger, only overwhelming exhaustion, and the silent plea every parent understands. Please, save them. Something inside Caleb shifted. He had seen desperate eyes before, children trapped in burning houses, parents begging firefighters to find someone still inside, people standing on rooftops watching everything they owned disappear beneath floodwater. But these eyes were different. This mother had already accepted that she might die. She simply refused to let her babies die first. Caleb swallowed hard. "I've got you," he whispered. The words surprised even him. He hadn't spoken that gently in a very long time. He hooked one arm beneath the crate while gripping the rescue rope with the other. The river fought him immediately. The current twisted his body sideways. The crate slammed against the tree. His shoulder struck a submerged branch. Pain exploded down his arm. He ignored it. One pull, another. Hand over hand, every foot felt like 10. The mother dog never moved. She somehow understood that staying perfectly still was the only way to keep the crate balanced. She trusted a complete stranger with the only two lives that mattered to her. Caleb reached the boat, gasping for air. With one final surge, he heaved the crate over the aluminum rail. It crashed onto the deck. The puppies cried. The mother didn't. She simply lowered her head over them once again. Caleb dragged himself aboard seconds later, collapsing beside the crate. Rain tapped softly against his helmet. His entire body shook from cold. For several long moments, neither firefighter nor dog moved. Then Caleb slowly removed one glove. He extended his hand. The German shepherd lifted her head. She studied him carefully. Not as an animal judging a stranger, but almost as one rescuer recognizing another. Slowly, she leaned forward. Her wet nose touched his trembling fingers. Then, with the last strength she had left, she rested her heavy head in his open palm. Caleb closed his fingers gently around her soaked fur. A warmth he hadn't felt in years flickered somewhere deep inside his chest. He didn't understand it. Not yet. He only knew one thing. When he turned the boat toward higher ground, this wasn't just another rescue anymore. It felt like the beginning of something neither of them had been searching for, yet both of them desperately needed. The rain finally faded before dawn, leaving only a heavy mist drifting above the soaked earth and the endless smell of wet wood, mud, and smoke from distant emergency crews. Caleb carried the heavy blue storage crate through the front door of his small cabin without turning on the lights. The electricity had failed hours earlier. Only the beam from his firefighter's flashlight cut through the darkness. The cabin reflected the man who lived inside it. Simple, practical, almost empty. A worn leather couch sat against one wall. A wooden dining table occupied the corner near the kitchen. Several framed certificates from the fire department leaned against the wall instead of hanging on it, as though Caleb had never cared enough to decorate. This wasn't a home. It was a place to sleep between emergencies. He carefully lowered the crate onto the hardwood floor. The German Shepherd immediately shifted her body, shielding the puppies again. Her lips curled ever so slightly. Not a threat, a warning. Caleb recognized the difference. He had rescued frightened dogs from burning homes before. Fear often looked like aggression. He slowly removed his soaked helmet and gloves. "It's okay," he said softly. His own voice sounded unfamiliar. Firefighters were used to shouting over roaring flames and collapsing roofs. Speaking quietly felt strangely difficult. The dog never blinked. Her amber eyes followed every movement he made. Caleb walked into the kitchen. His pantry was nearly empty. One loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, instant coffee, several cans of chicken he kept for emergency deployments. He reached for the chicken without hesitation. "If I'm eating peanut butter tonight," he murmured to himself, "you're eating better than I am." He opened 3 cans and emptied them into a large stainless steel mixing bowl. Then he added warm bottled water. The smell filled the quiet cabin. When Caleb returned, he didn't approach her directly. Instead, he slid the bowl across the floor until it rested beside the crate. Then he backed away. The German Shepherd lowered her nose toward the food but didn't move. Not yet. She looked at Caleb, then at her puppies, then back at Caleb again. She was making a decision: trust or survival. Several long minutes passed. Finally, she climbed carefully from the crate. Only then did Caleb realize how thin she truly was. Every rib was visible beneath her soaked coat. One rear leg favored the other slightly. Old injuries, not flood injuries, older. She approached the bowl cautiously. Then hunger won. She devoured the chicken so quickly that Caleb wondered how many days it had been since she'd eaten. When she finished, she surprised him. Instead of returning immediately to the puppies, she picked up one puppy gently by the scruff. She carried it onto the dry blanket Caleb had spread nearby. Then she returned for the second. Only after both puppies were lying safely on the blanket did she curl around them again. Caleb smiled. A smart mom. The dog glanced toward him. For just a second, her tail tapped the blanket once, not wagging, simply acknowledging his words. That tiny movement somehow felt larger than any dramatic display of affection. Later that evening, Caleb built a small fire inside the stone fireplace. The warmth slowly spread through the cabin. Steam rose from the dog's damp fur. The puppies finally stopped shivering. Caleb sat on the floor nearly 10 feet away, giving them space. He watched the mother nurse her babies. His chest tightened unexpectedly. Years earlier, he had imagined a very different future. Marriage, children, a house filled with noise. Instead, fire had become his family. Alarm tones had replaced birthday parties. Emergency calls had replaced vacations. He had watched marriages crumble inside the firehouse because someone always missed another anniversary, another Christmas, another first birthday. Caleb had chosen the job. He never regretted saving lives. But somewhere along the way, He quietly accepted that no one would ever be waiting for him at home. Until tonight. The puppies squeaked softly as they searched for milk. The mother licked each one with patient devotion. The cabin no longer felt empty. For the first time in months, it sounded alive. Near midnight, Caleb finally stretched out on the couch in full uniform. Years of overnight calls had trained him never to sleep too deeply. The fire crackled gently. Rain tapped against the windows. Within minutes, sleep claimed him. Then the nightmare came. Sirens, not rescue sirens, mayday sirens, smoke thicker than night, a warehouse engulfed in flames. Caleb remembered every second, his captain shouting orders, the ceiling groaning, his closest friend, Mason, disappearing behind a wall of fire after rushing back inside to search for a trapped teenager. "Caleb!" The scream echoed again, exactly as it had 3 years ago. The roof collapsed. Orange flames swallowed everything. Caleb ran toward the fire. Someone grabbed his shoulder. He fought free. "Mason!" The explosion threw him backward. Heat consumed the air. He couldn't breathe, couldn't see, couldn't reach his friend. His hands clawed desperately through burning debris. Caleb jerked upright. His breathing came in violent gasps. His heart pounded so hard his ribs hurt. Sweat soaked the collar of his shirt, despite the cold room. For several seconds he couldn't remember where he was. Only smoke, only fire, only guilt. "I should have reached him." His voice broke. "I should have gotten there." Silence answered him, then click, click, click. Soft claws crossed the wooden floor. Caleb slowly lifted his head. The German shepherd stood only a few feet away. The puppies remained asleep beside the fireplace. She had left them. For him. She walked closer without making a sound. No barking, no whining, no sudden movement. She simply stopped beside the couch, lowered her head, and rested her chin gently against Caleb's knee. He stared at her. The dog looked directly into his eyes. There was something strangely familiar about her calm expression. She wasn't trying to distract him. She wasn't demanding attention. She was simply present. As if saying, "You're here now. You're safe. Stay with me." Caleb's trembling hands slowly reached toward her head. She leaned into the touch immediately, warm, solid, alive. His fingers buried themselves in her thick neck fur. The steady rhythm of her breathing slowly pulled his own breathing back under control. Minute by minute, the panic faded. The nightmare loosened its grip. Caleb swallowed hard. "I never even thanked him." The words escaped before he realized he had spoken them aloud. The German shepherd remained perfectly still, listening, not judging, just listening. He rubbed behind one ear. "You would have liked him," Caleb whispered. "He loved dogs." The dog closed her eyes. For the first time since he'd carried her from the flood, she allowed herself to relax completely beneath his hand. Caleb sat there for nearly an hour. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them needed to. Outside, floodwater continued draining back toward the river. Inside, 2 broken survivors shared the quiet. One wore a firefighter's badge, the other wore nothing at all. Yet somehow, they already understood each other better than most people ever could. As dawn's first pale light slipped through the cabin windows, Caleb watched the German shepherd lift her head and quietly return to her puppies. She checked each tiny body carefully before lying beside them once more. He smiled to himself. "You need a name." The dog looked up. Caleb studied her calm posture, the discipline, the patience, the unwavering instinct to protect everyone around her before herself. She reminded him of every veteran firefighter who had ever walked into danger without hesitation. "How about Sherman?" One ear twitched, the corner of Caleb's mouth lifted. "Sherman it is." The German shepherd stared at him for another long moment, then, almost imperceptibly, her tail touched the floor twice, not enough to celebrate, just enough to answer. Caleb didn't know why that tiny gesture warmed his heart so deeply. He only knew something had changed inside that quiet cabin. The rescue had ended, but another journey, one far more personal, had just begun. A week after the flood, warm sunlight finally reached the valley, drying the soaked earth and filling the quiet neighborhood with the sounds of hammers, chainsaws, and neighbors rebuilding what the river had nearly erased. For the first time in days, Caleb wasn't racing toward an emergency. He was home. The cabin smelled faintly of fresh-cut pine from the firewood stacked beside the porch, mixed with the comforting scent of coffee brewing in the kitchen. Sherman lay beneath the morning sun just outside the front steps. The two puppies had changed dramatically in only a week. Their eyes had opened. Their tiny legs had grown stronger. Instead of sleeping all day, they now stumbled clumsily through the grass, wrestling with each other and barking in squeaky little voices that sounded far too confident for creatures barely able to stand. Caleb leaned against the porch railing, coffee mug in hand. He found himself smiling more often now. Not because life had become easier. The flood damage remained everywhere. Entire blocks still sat buried beneath layers of dried mud. Families continued cleaning what little they had left. The fire department worked around the clock, responding to gas leaks, unstable structures, and electrical hazards. But every evening, he came home to Sherman, to two puppies that greeted him like he'd been gone for months instead of hours. Somehow, that changed everything. By late afternoon, the weather had become surprisingly warm. Caleb rolled an old garden hose across the yard. "You've earned a bath," he said, looking toward Sherman. She lifted her head immediately. Unlike most dogs he'd known, she didn't bolt at the sight of water. She simply stood, waiting, almost expecting instructions. Caleb frowned slightly. "Come." Sherman walked directly toward him, not wandering, not sniffing around, straight to his left side. She stopped precisely beside his leg, heel position. Caleb blinked. That wasn't coincidence. He'd seen enough police canine demonstrations during wildfire operations to recognize disciplined obedience. He knelt beside her. "You're full of surprises, aren't you?" Sherman watched him calmly. He adjusted the spray nozzle until warm water flowed across her back. Brown mud immediately streamed onto the concrete, layer after layer washed away. Caleb worked shampoo deep into her thick coat. The more dirt disappeared, the healthier Sherman looked. Her black saddle gleamed beneath the sunlight. The tan markings around her face became rich and vibrant. She wasn't simply beautiful. She looked powerful, built for endurance. Her muscles remained remarkably strong despite weeks of hardship. As Caleb scrubbed around her shoulders, his fingers paused. Scars, old ones. One crossed her right shoulder beneath the fur, another ran along her rib cage. Not cuts from tree branches, not flood injuries. These had healed years ago. He traced them gently. "You've been through some things." Sherman remained perfectly still, not flinching, not resisting, just watching him with those intelligent amber eyes. The puppies waddled toward the patio. One immediately attacked the garden hose as though it were the world's greatest enemy. The other tried chewing on Caleb's bootlace. He laughed. "You two are fearless." The sound surprised him. Real laughter. It had been a long time. After drying Sherman with two large towels, Caleb reached for her old collar. It was still coated in hardened mud from the flood. "I might as well clean this too." He carried it into the garage. The garage had become his favorite place to think. Workbench, old firefighter equipment, tools hanging neatly on pegboards. Everything exactly where he expected it to be. Order. Order made sense. He placed the collar beneath a bright work light. Using a stiff nylon brush and warm water, he slowly removed layers of dried mud. The collar itself appeared unusually thick. Military-grade nylon, far stronger than anything sold in pet stores. He kept brushing. Something metallic scraped beneath the bristles. Caleb stopped. He rinsed away another layer. A narrow steel plate appeared beneath the grime. His heartbeat slowed. He picked up a small screwdriver and gently scraped away the remaining dirt. Letters emerged, then numbers, 3 capital letters, 4 digits, stamped deeply into the metal. Caleb stared without blinking. He knew that format, not because he'd owned a working dog, but because firefighters regularly trained alongside specialized search and rescue K9 teams after earthquakes and wildfires. Every operational dog carried government-issued identification, exactly like this. His fingers tightened around the collar. "No," he whispered. He looked through the open garage door. Sherman lay peacefully beneath the maple tree, while the puppies climbed all over her back. She watched them with endless patience. Caleb looked back at the metal plate, then at Sherman again. Suddenly, everything he'd witnessed over the past week fit together. The perfect heel position, her absolute calm during the flood, the way she'd assessed him before accepting food, her instinctive response to his nightmare, her flawless discipline. Even the way she protected the puppies wasn't ordinary. She always positioned herself facing every doorway, always facing possible danger. She wasn't merely surviving. She was maintaining security, like someone trained to guard others before herself. Sherman wasn't a stray. She had belonged somewhere important. That evening, Caleb worked on repairing the broken porch railing. One of the support posts had cracked when floating debris slammed into it during the flood. He balanced a new board into position, reached for his adjustable wrench. The tool slipped from his fingers. It bounced down the steps into the grass. Before Caleb could move, Sherman was already there. She walked directly to the wrench, not running, not playing, working. She lowered her head, picked up the heavy steel tool carefully by its center, turned, walked back. She climbed every porch step without dropping it once. When she reached Caleb, she sat. Perfect posture, head high, holding the wrench horizontally, waiting, not moving. Waiting for permission. Caleb's chest tightened. Slowly, he accepted the tool. "Thank you." Sherman continued sitting, watching him, as though expecting another command. Caleb swallowed. Free. Immediately she relaxed. Her ears softened. She turned and returned to the puppies. Caleb remained frozen on the porch. No ordinary dog performed a textbook retrieve like that. No ordinary family pet waited for a release command. Every doubt vanished. Someone had invested years into training this remarkable animal. Someone had trusted her with missions where lives depended on absolute obedience, and somewhere, someone was almost certainly searching for her. That realization should have made the decision easy. Report the identification number, find the owner, return Sherman home. Instead, a heaviness settled over Caleb's heart. He looked across the yard. The puppies were chasing butterflies. Sherman lay quietly beneath the tree, watching them with gentle eyes. For the first time since the flood, the cabin felt like a home instead of temporary shelter. The silence no longer echoed. There was laughter, there was life, there was purpose waiting for him every evening. He imagined this place without Sherman, without the puppies, without those quiet amber eyes waiting at the front door after every shift. The thought hurt far more than he expected. Caleb looked down at the collar resting in his hands. He could throw it away. No one would ever know. The flood had destroyed thousands of homes. one missing collar would disappear into history. He closed his eyes. His father's voice echoed from childhood. "A firefighter protects what belongs to others, son, especially when nobody's watching." Caleb opened his eyes again. He looked toward Sherman. She met his gaze from across the yard, completely trusting, completely unaware of the battle raging inside him. Caleb wrapped his fingers around the collar. "I'll find your family." The words tasted like heartbreak. Sherman stood slowly. She walked toward him, rested her head gently against his shoulder, as if thanking him, before either of them knew what that promise would ultimately cost. The morning air carried the fresh scent of pine and damp earth, while the last traces of floodwater disappeared into the river that had stolen so much only days before. Caleb barely slept. The cleaned collar rested on his kitchen table beside a folded notepad. Every time he walked past it, the stamped serial number seemed to demand another look. He had already memorized every character. 3 letters, 4 numbers, a government identification. Proof that Sherman belonged to a life long before she drifted into his. She deserved to go home. The realization should have brought peace. Instead, it hollowed him out. Caleb arrived at the fire station before sunrise. The building buzzed with its usual rhythm. Coffee brewing, boots striking concrete, dispatch radios crackling from every direction. His captain looked up from a clipboard. "You look worse than you did during the flood." Caleb forced a smile. "Didn't sleep much." "You should." The older firefighter patted him on the shoulder. "We save people better when we remember we're human." Caleb nodded but said nothing. Being human was exactly what made this decision so difficult. The day passed in routine calls. A fallen power line, a kitchen grease fire, an elderly woman trapped inside an elevator after electrical repairs shut down the building. Nothing life-threatening. For the first time in weeks, Caleb had enough quiet moments for his mind to wander. Each time it did, it returned to Sherman. During lunch break, he stepped outside and unlocked his phone. His thumb hovered over one contact: Daniel Pierce. Daniel had once served as a canine specialist attached to regional search and rescue teams before retiring from federal service. If anyone could identify the collar, it was Daniel. Caleb hesitated. The call would change everything. Finally, he pressed dial. The phone rang twice. "Daniel speaking." "It's Caleb Brooks." A brief pause. "Well, I'll be damned. Haven't heard from you since those mountain wildfires." "What can I do for you?" "I found a German shepherd after the flood." "So?" "She's wearing something interesting." Caleb read the identification code slowly. Silence. Longer this time. Then came the rapid clicking of computer keys. Daniel's voice became noticeably more serious. "Where did you find her?" "Floating in a storage crate with 2 newborn puppies." "You said puppies?" "Yeah." More typing. Finally, "I've got her." Caleb gripped the phone tighter. "Tell me." "Her registered working name is Sherman." Caleb looked across the parking lot. He smiled despite himself. "So I guessed right." Daniel chuckled softly. "Looks like you did." "What was she?" "Not military." Caleb blinked. "What?" "Federal Urban Search and Rescue," Daniel continued reading. "Specialized disaster response canine, trained for collapsed buildings, wildfire evacuations, flood recovery, missing person searches." Caleb slowly sat down on the station steps. A rescue dog. Not a police dog. Not military. A firefighter. Just like him. Suddenly, everything made even more sense. The calm under pressure, the perfect obedience, her instinct to search, her refusal to abandon victims. She hadn't merely protected her puppies, she had been protecting lives her entire career. Daniel continued. She retired about 2 years ago after developing arthritis in one rear hip. Caleb listened quietly. Retired to whom? A former firefighter. Caleb closed his eyes. Of course. His name? Harrison Cole. Daniel paused again. 39 years with the department before retirement. Another firefighter, another man who had probably lived through smoke, loss, impossible decisions, exactly as Caleb had. Where does he live? Daniel gave him an address. It wasn't far, less than an hour's drive. Then Daniel's voice softened. Caleb. Yeah? I've met Harrison. You have? He adored that dog. Daniel stopped typing. I mean, absolutely adored her. Caleb swallowed. They worked dozens of major disasters together before Sherman retired. He pictured the old firefighter throwing tennis balls, late-night walks, quiet mornings drinking coffee while Sherman lay nearby. The image hurt more than he expected. Daniel continued. One more thing. What? I've been monitoring flood reports. Caleb felt his stomach tighten. Harrison's town was hit harder than yours. How bad? Bad enough that several neighborhoods had mandatory evacuations. Silence filled the line. Neither man spoke. Finally, Daniel said quietly, If Sherman disappeared during that evacuation, he'll be looking for her. Every single day. Caleb drove home with the windows down. The afternoon breeze carried the smell of freshly cut lumber. People were rebuilding. Children rode bicycles through streets that had been underwater only a week ago. Life moved forward, whether people were ready or not. When Caleb pulled into his driveway, Sherman was waiting. She always seemed to know the sound of his truck. The puppies came tumbling behind her like two oversized fur balls, barking excitedly before tripping over each other. Caleb laughed. One puppy grabbed his bootlace. The other attacked the cuff of his jeans. Sherman simply watched, content, peaceful, home. He knelt and scratched behind her ears. I found him. Sherman's ears lifted slightly. You've got someone waiting for you. She tilted her head, completely unaware of what the words meant. That evening, Caleb packed a small travel crate for the puppies. Fresh towels, bottled water, formula, blankets, everything they would need. Sherman followed him from room to room, never leaving his side. Every time he stopped, she sat beside him, watching, trusting. His chest grew heavier with every passing minute. When everything was finally packed, he carried the crate to his pickup truck. The puppies immediately curled together and fell asleep. Caleb stood beside the open tailgate for a long time. He imagined tomorrow, driving to a stranger's house, watching Sherman run toward the man she'd once loved, turning around, driving home alone. No paws clicking across the hardwood floor, no puppies wrestling in the living room, no warm head resting against his knee after another difficult shift. Only silence. The same silence that had haunted the cabin before the flood. He leaned against the truck and covered his face with both hands. For just a moment, a dangerous thought appeared. No one else knew about the collar. He could simply throw it away, tell no one. Sherman would stay. The puppies would stay. His new family would remain exactly as it was. The temptation lasted only seconds. Then another memory surfaced. His first day in the fire academy. The instructor had stood before dozens of recruits and said, "Integrity isn't tested when doing the right thing feels good. It's tested when doing the right thing breaks your own heart." Caleb slowly lowered his hands. He looked toward the porch. Sherman sat quietly beneath the light. Her eyes never left him. She believed completely in the man who had rescued her. She had trusted him with her puppies, trusted him with her life. He couldn't betray that trust now, not by stealing her future. Caleb walked back to the porch and knelt beside her. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "we'll find your firefighter." Sherman gently pressed her forehead against his chest. She didn't know where they were going. She only knew she would follow him. Anywhere. The trust in that simple gesture nearly shattered what remained of Caleb's resolve. He wrapped both arms around her neck. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Above them, the evening sky turned shades of orange and gold. It looked peaceful. But inside Caleb's heart, another storm had already begun. He was driving toward the hardest rescue of his life, because sometimes saving someone meant finding the strength to let them go. The morning sky was bright and cloudless, almost cruel in its beauty, as Caleb steered his old pickup along a quiet country highway, carrying a family he had already begun grieving before he had even lost them. Sherman sat upright in the passenger seat exactly as she had every day since the flood. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't excited. She simply watched the road ahead with calm, intelligent eyes. Behind them, nestled inside a padded crate lined with fresh blankets, the two puppies slept through the gentle hum of the tires. Caleb rested one hand on the steering wheel, while the other occasionally reached across the seat to stroke Sherman's neck. He wondered how many more times he would be able to do that. For nearly an hour, neither of them made a sound. The silence between them no longer felt empty. It felt heavy, like the final minutes before saying goodbye to someone who had quietly become part of your soul. The highway eventually narrowed into a winding two-lane road. Signs of the flood became more obvious with every mile. Telephone poles leaned at awkward angles, farm fences lay twisted beside swollen creeks, entire fields remained coated in thick layers of dried silt. Caleb followed the navigation until the voice announced, "You have arrived." He slowed the truck. The address matched, but the house didn't. A towering oak tree had crashed directly through the center of the small farmhouse. Half the roof had collapsed. Broken windows stared outward like empty eyes. The front porch no longer existed. Mud still covered everything from the front yard to what remained of the garage. Caleb's stomach tightened. No one could have lived here after the flood. He shut off the engine. Sherman immediately became alert. She stared through the windshield without moving. Her ears stood forward, almost listening. Caleb climbed out of the truck. The morning air felt strangely still. He had taken only a few steps toward the ruined house when a woman's voice interrupted him. "Can I help you?" He turned. A woman in her early 30s stood beside a neighboring mailbox. She wore faded jeans, work boots, and a gray sweatshirt streaked with drywall dust. Her brown hair was tied into a loose ponytail, and exhaustion surrounded her eyes like permanent shadows. She carried a cardboard box filled with salvaged photographs. "I'm looking for Harrison Cole." The woman stopped walking. For several seconds, she simply stared at him. Then her eyes drifted toward the pickup truck, toward Sherman. The box slipped from her hands, old family photographs scattered across the gravel. Her lips parted. "No," she whispered. Sherman slowly stepped down from the truck. She sniffed the air. The woman's breathing became uneven. "Oh my God." Fresh tears instantly filled her eyes. "Sherman." The German shepherd froze. She stared at the woman, her nose lifted again, searching. Something familiar lingered in the scent carried by the breeze. The woman wore an old navy blue firefighter jacket, several sizes too large. It clearly hadn't belonged to her. Sherman took 3 slow steps forward. She buried her nose against the sleeve. Then, everything changed. The calm, disciplined rescue dog disappeared. Sherman began trembling violently. She inhaled again, again. Looking desperately around the ruined property, searching, waiting, expecting someone else to appear. Her tail slowly lowered. She looked toward the collapsed house, then back at the jacket. A heartbreaking sound escaped her throat, not a bark, not a growl, a long, broken cry. The kind of sound no living creature should ever have to make. The woman dropped to her knees. Sherman threw herself into her arms. The two clung to each other in the middle of the gravel driveway. Caleb quietly stepped back. He didn't belong in this moment. Several minutes passed before the woman finally managed to speak.
"My name is Rachel."
Her voice shook. "I'm Harrison's daughter." Caleb nodded gently. "I'm Caleb Brooks." "You saved her." "I found her during the flood." Rachel looked down at Sherman. Fresh tears rolled silently down her cheeks. "We searched for 4 days." She brushed trembling fingers through Sherman's fur. "The rescue center said they never found her." "We thought," her voice broke, "we thought she'd drowned." Sherman rested her head against Rachel's shoulder, but continued looking toward the ruined farmhouse. Still waiting, still hoping. Caleb already knew the answer before he asked. "Harrison?" Rachel closed her eyes. "My dad never made it." Silence settled between them. The wind stirred fallen leaves across the broken driveway. Rachel took a slow breath. "The evacuation happened at night." She spoke without looking up. "The river rose so fast nobody expected it." She swallowed hard. "Dad refused to leave until every neighbor got onto the rescue boats." Caleb wasn't surprised. He'd known firefighters like that, the kind who always left last. He finally agreed after everyone else was safe. Rachel continued quietly, but halfway to the evacuation center, he collapsed. She pressed one hand over her mouth. "The doctors said it was a massive heart attack." Sherman whimpered softly. Rachel hugged her tighter. "They tried CPR." "They tried everything." Caleb lowered his eyes. He had witnessed too many scenes exactly like that. Emergency responders fought death with everything they had. Sometimes, death still won. Rachel gently wiped her tears. When the paramedics started working on Dad, someone unclipped Sherman's leash. The sirens, the shouting, the flashing lights, she panicked. Rachel looked toward the distant river. She ran. "We searched every shelter, every rescue list, every animal clinic. We never stopped looking." Caleb felt his throat tighten. He finally understood why Sherman had been drifting alone in the flood. She hadn't been abandoned. She had been trying to survive, trying to return to someone who would never come home. "I should show you something." Caleb walked to the truck. He opened the rear door. The 2 puppies immediately woke. One stretched dramatically before tumbling clumsily over its sibling. Rachel stared in disbelief. "Puppies?" Caleb smiled softly. "We found them together." Rachel laughed through tears. "Dad would have lost his mind." She knelt beside the crate. "They're beautiful." Sherman walked over immediately. She gently nudged one puppy back toward the blanket after it tried climbing over the edge. Rachel watched the interaction. Dad always called her his captain. She never stopped taking care of everyone. Caleb nodded. "I've noticed." Rachel looked up. "You have firefighter eyes." Caleb blinked. "What?" "You watch every exit. You automatically position yourself between people in danger. My father did exactly the same thing." She smiled sadly. "And so does Sherman." For the first time since arriving, Caleb felt as though someone truly saw him. Not just the uniform, not just the man, the wounds underneath. Rachel glanced toward Sherman again. "She helped my dad sleep." She spoke quietly. "He had nightmares from 39 years on the job. He'd wake up thinking buildings were still collapsing. She always knew." She'd lay her head on his chest until his breathing slowed. Caleb's heartbeat stumbled. His own nightmares, his own sleepless nights. Sherman had done exactly the same thing for him. Not once. Every night. Rachel noticed the look in his eyes. She studied him carefully, then looked at Sherman, then back again. A quiet understanding slowly crossed her face. She hadn't said the words yet, but something inside her had already begun to change, and Caleb sensed this journey wasn't ending the way either of them had expected. Golden afternoon sunlight spilled across the ruined yard, warming broken boards and shattered bricks that still carried the scars of the flood, while the quiet breeze rustled through the branches of the only oak tree left standing. Rachel remained kneeling beside Sherman. The German shepherd had stopped crying, but she hadn't moved away from the old firefighter's daughter. Every few seconds she glanced toward Caleb, as though unwilling to lose sight of either person. She was caught between two worlds. One belonged to the man she had lost. The other belonged to the man who had pulled her from death. Caleb understood the feeling better than anyone. Firefighters spent their entire careers standing between what had been and what could still be saved. Sometimes they succeeded. Sometimes all they could do was carry people through the grief. Rachel gently scratched behind Sherman's ears. "My father used to say something." Caleb looked at her. "He believed dogs don't choose homes." She smiled sadly. "They choose people." Sherman slowly stood and walked toward Caleb. She stopped beside him. Not behind Rachel, not between them. Beside him. Her shoulder lightly touched his leg. Rachel noticed. She noticed everything. The three of them walked slowly around what remained of the property. Rachel pointed toward the collapsed garage. "Dad built that himself after retirement." She laughed softly. "He kept every tool organized with labels." Caleb smiled. "So do firefighters." She nodded. "The garage survived more inspections than our kitchen." They both laughed quietly. For a brief moment, grief loosened its grip. Rachel led Caleb toward a small metal storage shed behind the ruined house. Unlike the farmhouse, the shed had escaped major damage. She unlocked the rusted padlock. Inside stood shelves packed with neatly organized equipment. Old helmets, fire boots, ropes, axes, rescue gear, and dozens of framed photographs. Rachel carefully removed one frame. She handed it to Caleb. It showed Harrison 20 years younger, standing beside Sherman during what appeared to be a building collapse. Both of them were covered in gray dust. Both looked exhausted. Both looked proud. "They rescued 3 children that day," Rachel said quietly. "Dad never talked about himself. He only talked about her." Caleb stared at the photograph. Sherman looked almost identical, only younger. The same steady eyes, the same calm posture. He suddenly realized Sherman had probably saved more lives than most firefighters ever would. Rachel opened another cabinet. Inside rested a thick leather journal. The cover had been scorched by heat years earlier. "Dad wrote in this almost every night." She brushed dust from the pages. "He said writing helped him leave difficult calls behind before coming home." Caleb understood immediately. Many firefighters found their own ways to survive emotionally. Some ran marathons, some hunted, some buried everything until it finally buried them instead. Rachel flipped carefully toward the last pages. She hesitated. "I think," she looked at Caleb, "you should read this." He accepted the journal carefully. The handwriting remained surprisingly strong despite Harrison's age. Most entries described rescue calls, funny stories from the firehouse, Sherman's progress after retirement. Then Caleb reached the final page. The date was only 3 weeks before the flood. He began reading silently. "Sherman's hips ache more these days. She pretends they don't. Still follows me from room to room like she's worried I'll wander off without her." Caleb smiled faintly. That sounded familiar. The next paragraph stole his breath. I've been thinking a lot about what happens after I'm gone. My daughter loves Sherman, but she has 2 young boys, travels constantly for work, and lives in the city. Sherman belongs with someone who understands alarms in the middle of the night, someone who knows the smell of smoke, someone who has carried strangers through impossible days. She belongs with another firefighter. Caleb stopped reading, his vision blurred. Rachel quietly finished the final sentence. Dad always said, if Sherman ever chooses another firefighter, don't stand in her way. Silence settled over the little shed. Only the distant singing of birds drifted through the broken doorway. Caleb slowly closed the journal. I can't, Rachel looked at him. I can't take her. She belongs to your family. Rachel gently shook her head. No. She belongs to the family she chooses. Caleb opened his mouth to protest. Rachel raised one hand. Listen. My father rescued people for almost 4 decades. He believed every rescue continued long after the sirens stopped. She looked toward Sherman. When you pulled her from that flood, you thought you were saving her. Rachel smiled softly. But she finished the rescue. Caleb frowned. What do you mean? She looked directly into his eyes. I've been watching you all afternoon. The way she watches you. The way you reach for her without thinking. The way your shoulders finally relax when she's close. Rachel's voice grew gentler. I've seen that look before. My father had the same look. She stepped closer. You didn't just save Sherman. She brought you back. Caleb looked away. He couldn't deny it. Not anymore. Before Sherman, his cabin had been silent. He slept only a few hours each night. He avoided neighbors, avoided conversations, avoided memories. Now, children laughed in his yard. Neighbors waved when he came home. He smiled. Sometimes without realizing it. The change hadn't happened because time passed. It happened because one exhausted rescue dog refused to let another rescuer remain lost. Rachel knelt beside the puppies. One climbed clumsily into her lap. The other immediately tried chewing on her boot. She laughed through fresh tears. Dad would have spoiled these 2 rotten. Sherman lay beside her, peaceful, safe. Rachel stroked the dog's neck one last time. Then she unclipped the old collar. The weathered nylon felt heavy in her hands. She traced the scratched metal identification plate. This belonged to Dad. She looked toward the great oak tree behind the house. Let's leave it with him. Together they walked beneath the tree. Caleb found an old garden shovel leaning against the shed. He dug a small hole beneath the spreading branches. Rachel carefully placed the collar inside. Neither of them spoke while Caleb covered it with earth. When the last handful of soil settled into place, Rachel rested her palm against the fresh mound. He would have been happy, she whispered, because he would have known Sherman wasn't alone. Caleb removed his firefighter cap. The afternoon breeze moved gently through the leaves above them. He bowed his head. Not just for Harrison, but for every firefighter who had ever walked into danger believing someone else deserved another tomorrow. When he looked up again, Rachel was smiling. A real smile this time. She walked toward Caleb and placed the puppy's travel crate back into his hands. Take them home. Caleb stared at her. She nodded. All 3 of them. Sherman immediately stood. She walked directly to Caleb's side, then she leaned against his leg with complete certainty. Rachel laughed softly. See? I don't think she was ever asking my permission. Caleb felt something inside his chest finally loosen. Not relief, not joy, something deeper. Peace. He looked at Rachel. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure she never regrets choosing me." "I know," Rachel answered without hesitation, "and promise me one more thing. Anything. Don't let her retire." Caleb looked down at Sherman. The old rescue dog gazed back at him with quiet wisdom. Rachel smiled. "She still has lives left to save." Caleb slowly nodded. "So do I." And for the first time since the floodwaters had swallowed the valley, he believed those words were true. A gentle autumn breeze drifted across the open field, carrying the laughter of children, the sharp whistles of training exercises, and the quiet hope that sometimes grows only after a storm has destroyed everything else. 6 months had passed. If someone had visited Caleb's cabin today, they never would have guessed how empty it once felt. The porch had been rebuilt. Flower boxes lined the front windows. A freshly painted wooden sign stood beside the gravel driveway. Brooks Rescue Canine Center. Beneath the name, smaller carved letters read, "Helping Heroes Heal." Every morning began before sunrise. Old habits never disappeared. Caleb still woke before his alarm, brewed strong coffee, and walked outside while the world remained wrapped in silence. Only now, he wasn't alone. Sherman waited patiently beside the porch steps, her muzzle beginning to show a few strands of gray. The 2 puppies, no longer puppies at all, bounded through the grass with endless energy. Caleb had named them Ranger and Blaze. They had inherited their mother's intelligence but possessed completely different personalities. Ranger approached every task carefully, studying before acting. Blaze charged into everything with fearless enthusiasm, often creating twice as much work for everyone else. Sherman tolerated both with the endless patience only a mother could possess. Caleb clipped a whistle onto his shirt. "Ready?" Sherman's ears lifted. Ranger immediately sat. Blaze continued chasing a butterfly. Caleb smiled. "Blaze!" The young shepherd froze. He looked guilty before Caleb had even said another word. "Come." Blaze sprinted across the yard. Seconds later, all 3 dogs sat perfectly in front of Caleb. 3 pairs of amber eyes waited for instructions. Months earlier, he had been the one searching for purpose. Now others searched for him. The rescue center had started almost by accident. After Rachel returned home, she called Caleb every few days. At first, they talked only about Sherman. Then they talked about Harrison. Eventually, they talked about life. One evening, Rachel asked a simple question. "What if there are other firefighters who need what Sherman gave you?" The idea refused to leave Caleb's mind. He contacted the local animal shelter, then several veteran organizations. Soon the fire department offered an unused training field. Within weeks, former rescue dogs and shelter dogs began arriving. Some were frightened. Some had been abandoned. Some trusted no one. Caleb understood every one of them, because broken things recognized each other. Sherman became the heart of the entire program. She never barked during training, she simply demonstrated. When anxious veterans arrived, shaking from sleepless nights, Sherman quietly walked over and rested beside them. When retired firefighters struggled through painful memories, she somehow sensed exactly when to place her head against their knee. No commands, no rewards, just instinct, exactly as she had done for Harrison. Exactly as she had done for Caleb. Word spread farther than anyone expected. The local newspaper published a story titled, "Flood Rescue Dog Helps Save Firefighters Again." Soon donations arrived, then volunteers, retired firefighters offered equipment, veterinarians donated medical care, a carpenter built agility obstacles, children collected dog food during school fundraisers. The center slowly became more than Caleb had ever imagined. It became a community. One Saturday morning, a retired firefighter named Bill arrived carrying more emotional weight than physical strength. He hadn't slept through a full night in almost 10 years. The explosion that killed 2 members of his crew replayed every evening the moment he closed his eyes. Caleb recognized that haunted expression immediately because he had worn it himself. Sherman approached Bill quietly. She didn't jump, she didn't lick his face, she simply leaned against his leg. Bill's hands trembled as he reached down. Within seconds, his breathing slowed, his shoulders lowered, tears quietly rolled down weathered cheeks. "I forgot," he whispered. "I forgot what peace felt like." Caleb looked toward Sherman. She glanced back briefly before returning all her attention to the old firefighter. Still rescuing, still serving, even in retirement. Rachel visited almost every weekend. Sometimes she brought homemade cookies, sometimes old photographs of Harrison, sometimes nothing except herself. She had become part of the center without anyone ever asking. Children adored her, the dogs followed her everywhere. One afternoon she found Caleb repairing a fence after Ranger had enthusiastically tested its strength. "You know," she laughed, "Dad would have blamed Blaze." Caleb grinned. He would have been right. Blaze looked up from chewing a stick, somehow appearing offended despite clearly being guilty. Rachel laughed harder. The sound filled the entire field. Caleb realized he had begun waiting for weekends. Not because of the extra help, because of Rachel. She carried grief with remarkable grace. She never tried replacing her father. Instead, she honored him by helping others heal. One evening after training ended, they sat together on the porch while Sherman rested between them. The sun dipped behind distant hills, painting the sky in gold and crimson. Rachel broke the silence. "Do you ever think about that flood?" Caleb nodded slowly. "Every day." "Me too." She smiled gently, but not because of what it took. She reached down and scratched Sherman's neck. "Because of what it gave." Caleb looked at her. He realized she was right. That terrible day had stolen homes, it had stolen Harrison, it had left countless families rebuilding their lives. But somehow, out of all that loss, something beautiful had still managed to grow. Later that evening, Caleb walked toward the old oak tree standing near the edge of the property. Beneath it rested a simple wooden marker. No elaborate monument, only one sentence carved into cedar. "In honor of firefighter Harrison Cole, who never stopped saving lives." Caleb removed his cap. Sherman sat beside him. Ranger and Blaze lay quietly in the grass behind them. "I kept my promise," Caleb spoke softly. "I protected them." A warm breeze stirred the leaves overhead. For just a moment it sounded almost like distant applause. Rachel quietly joined him. She slipped her hand into his. Neither of them needed words. Sherman leaned against both of them, exactly as she had done from the beginning. Holding people together, just as she always had. Months later, during the annual Firefighter Appreciation Ceremony, the mayor presented Caleb with a Community Service Award. When asked to give a speech, he stepped to the microphone and looked across the crowd. Firefighters, police officers, veterans, families, children, and dozens of rescue dogs sitting proudly beside their handlers. Caleb smiled. "I've spent my career believing firefighters save lives." He paused. Then one day, a tired rescue dog floating in a plastic crate reminded me that sometimes the rescue goes both ways. The audience grew silent. He looked down at Sherman. She was older now, her muzzle a little grayer, her movements a little slower. But her eyes still held the same quiet wisdom they had the day she looked up from that flood-filled crate. "I thought I pulled Sherman out of the river." He smiled through moist eyes. "The truth is, She pulled me out of a place far deeper. Applause slowly filled the field. Rachel squeezed his hand. Sherman rested against his leg. Ranger and Blaze barked proudly from the front row, earning laughter from everyone nearby. Caleb looked toward the clear blue sky. He finally understood something Harrison had known all along. Heroes don't always wear helmets. Sometimes they have 4 paws. Sometimes they never speak a single word. And sometimes the greatest fire they extinguish is the one still burning inside a broken human heart. As the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, Caleb walked home surrounded by the family he never expected to find. The flood had taken many things, but it had also delivered a miracle inside a weathered blue crate. And because one exhausted rescue dog refused to stop believing in people, a lonely firefighter discovered that healing, like hope, is always strongest when it is shared. Before we say goodbye, remember this. God's greatest miracles don't always come with thunder or lightning. Sometimes they arrive quietly, a second chance, an unexpected friendship, or a faithful heart that reminds us we're never truly alone. Caleb thought he rescued Sherman from the flood, but in the end, Sherman rescued Caleb's heart. Perhaps that's how God works in our lives. Even after the darkest storms, He can turn pain into purpose and loss into hope. If you're facing a difficult season, don't give up. Keep your faith, keep showing kindness, and trust that God is still writing your story. Your best chapter may be the one that's still ahead. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who could use a little hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to support our channel and help us create more inspiring stories. May God bless you and your loved ones with peace, good health, strength, and joy. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story. God bless you.